And so when we learn anatomy, anatomy is going to be a reference to structure of the human body. And these structures alone can't really tell you how they function interchangeably, because you will have, as you'll see in a little bit, you have many systems. These are all the components of your body that you're going to learn throughout the semester. For example, skin, skeletal, muscle, nervous. All of them can be distinguished, but they work with each other. For example, nervous are all these nerve extensions that eventually will connect to muscles that you will move and control voluntarily, but they also control things that you don't control daily. Like, for example, your digestive tract. A lot of you had lunch or breakfast recently. And so you don't control the passage of materials and the digestion of your food in your digestive tract, but your nervous controls it. And so function is distinct from structure, but they are sort of, you can sort of draw conclusions around structure eventually once you learned a few systems. Physiology, which is the next pathway for all of you after you've taken anatomy, is actually seeing how these structures work interchangeably, or how specific structures work with each other. In other words, specific systems, such as how do muscles specifically work with each other? What is the cell biology of just muscle cells? What is the cell biology of just the nervous system? You will be addressing that when you get to physiology. But otherwise, in anatomy, we really just focus on structure and some symbol functions around that structure. And there's a difference between the study of anatomy and biology, because biology is the study of life. And that we are not the only organisms on the planet, so biology encompasses anything that is alive, such as bacteria, plants, things like that. We do not worry about, we just don't care about other organisms, but it is an important distinction to make, because we're going to have to see that the first thing that we're going to characterize is what is something that's living. What is a living thing? Because it may not be clear all the time. Now, first place to start is anatomical position. When you are describing the body, we all need to be able to describe the human body or hold on to this image of a person, so that if we're verbalizing about the body, we have to be able to have the same picture in our head. And so that position, that starting position, is called anatomical position. In anatomical position, it is described as the palms facing forward, the thumbs are lateral or to the sides, feet are just straight, neutral, underneath the shoulders, nice and easy, head facing forward. It's not anything complex, anatomical position. Be able to describe it. Okay? Be able to describe it. Lying down is referred to as being supinated. And so supinated means to, again, be lying in anatomical position on your back with your anterior or the front of your body facing the sky. Now, characteristics of living things. Describing what living things is might seem like such a duh thing, but it's not. Because life itself is very complicated. Like, for example, if I were to grab a little piece of your cells, like just one skin cells that's underneath your skin here, or even something from your lungs, and I grab a little cell and I put it in a little dish with all the food that it needs, it can grow in that dish without you. I can get that little cell to grow for multiple years and divide, and I can keep it alive for thousands of years without you. And I can do that with almost every single one of the components of your body. And so how is it alive, right, if it's not even part of you? So you have all these little things that are living that don't really care if they're attached to you or not. As long as that they have the nutrition around them, they can stay alive without your conscious thought or even your own existence. So life isn't as easy as just seeing something that's moving, something that eats or consumes. And so we have to define the characteristics of living things. Ask away.
Does that mean that a person's DNA can stay inside of you as well? Can it grow like other than a baby?
The way it works is that if we look at this image here, every single part of your body, like even if you're looking at the skin, is made up of some form of a little cell. Like, for example, this is a cell. Like, this right here is a fat cell. This right here is a white blood cell. This right here is a muscle cell, another white blood cell, red blood cell. They all have DNA inside. DNA. This is what you get from your parents, the instruction. And what's even crazier is that they have the same instructions, meaning that DNA is like an manual. Every single cell in your body, every single one that you're seeing in here has the same instruction manual. Then why are they different? Well, it's a philosophical question. I don't know if you're aware of this, but biology, anatomy, you're philosophers. When you enter medicine, you become a philosopher. It's separated from the other philosophy that talk about nonsense. We talk about natural philosophy, what exists in the real world that can be experimented on, and that is probably more tangible and usable. And I'm being mean. It's not. The other philosophy is not useless. But otherwise, they all have the same instruction manual. But the difference is that this cell reads pages 1 through 10. And this one will read maybe page 3, but it'll all read pages 12 through 20. They have the same instruction manual. And I don't know if any of you are aware of stem cell technology, but otherwise, that's the whole premise of it, is that since they all have the same instruction manual, I can grab a fat cell, maybe not a fat cell, they're a little more complicated, but if I grab, say, a muscle cell, one of these cells, I can go to its DNA and I can make it read the other pages, the other parts of that DNA, and I can turn it into a fat cell. I can make it turn into a neuron because the instructions are already there. All I have to do is turn them on and maybe even shut off the ones that they're reading here, and then I can turn it into any cell in the body. And so DNA is the instruction manual, and we're going to see that some cells don't really deal with DNA at some point. They don't even care for reading their DNA anymore, and so it's just very complicated. But for the most part, they are all composed of little living units called cells, composed of cells. The next one, they have complex arrangements. Here we are looking at a heart cell, which contracts like a rubber band, meaning that it shrinks. We're going to get a little more detail later, but it becomes smaller and contracts. And we're going to see that it's because it has very specific molecules inside of it that work. So they have large structural arrangements or organizations. They detect and respond to stimulus. For example, you have nerve cells on the skin, on the underneath your skin, and even on your skin, that detect anything that may harm your body. And so that's what they're there for, so that your body can detect anything and withdraw on time. So they're responsive, right? And if you think about it just from a larger perspective, if you think about just a wild animal that doesn't recognize it's being attacked by a predator, that's not a very smart animal or an animal that's going to survive very long. So they have to be able to detect when they're hungry. They have to be able to detect when they're actually when they're in danger. They have an ability to regulate an internal environment. And the easiest way to think about it is when you think about the body's temperature. That when you're outside right now that it's summer and you're walking from the car, walking to this classroom, what happens on the surface of our skin? We start sweating. And that sweating will just evaporate off and control the temperature of your body. And so that's an example of regulation. Cells and even at the larger level, organisms have the ability to regulate their internal bodies, their internal environment. Now, when it comes to this type of material in our exams, you do have to know them by memory, but at least I meet you halfway, where what I like to do is that I like to sort of include which one of these are characteristics of living things, and what I like to do is maybe put 4 of these, and then maybe I'll put a false one like on your options, and you just have to make sure that you know what they are. So you're just going to have to identify the ones that I'm making up, and then just make sure that you know these 7 as you go along. Be able to understand them. Even blind memorization or perfect memorization isn't necessary. Understanding what they represent matters more for each one. And organisms grow, right? If you think about from fetus to infancy, from fetus in the womb to actually becoming a baby, right? That's organisms growing, and they develop and mature, or even from going from infancy, going into childhood into adulthood. They mature, and so they grow and develop. And they produce offspring for human beings in particular. With females, they produce the egg, and sperms are produced by biological males. And that sperm will find the egg and eventually produce an embryo, which will lead to fetus and eventually baby. And so with that, when we think about reproduction, bacteria have a little bit different ways of making more copies of themselves, but that's a topic for microbiology. And then lastly, number 7, here, metabolism. This is going to be an important topic probably tomorrow if we make it there today. But metabolism is all the chemical processes of breaking things down. If you want to think about it simply, when you consume your breakfast this morning, your lunch, all of that has materials, all molecules that your body needs. Your body is extracting things from the environment all the time. Even right now as I breathe, right, I need oxygen. That's a gas. And that gas is essential, as essential as you eating breakfast is to every individual cell in your body. Everything inside me is, as I breathe that oxygen will get loaded into my blood vessels, and that oxygen will be delivered to all the cells in my body, and then they poop out CO2, and then when I breathe out carbon dioxide. And so you're always extracting materials from the outside world. When you're breathing, gases. When you consume food, you're ingesting it, and then you break it down. And that's what this image is trying to represent here, is that as you consume larger molecules inside of your food, you'll see that it's broken down into smaller components that will eventually go to create or serve as part of a cell. They're going to go and make up all these unique cells, all these units that make up everything in your body. And so they also, as a result, release energy. And so that's enough detail for now. And we'll get into cell biology a little bit more in detail, and a lot of this will be a little bit more clear as we learn a lot of these nuances regarding cells. And something I'd like to introduce now is that when you think about the terms surrounding metabolism, there's 2 words, anabolic and catabolic. Anabolic is the process of building up. Catabolic is the process of breaking down and usually has to deal with energy release. Energy. I'm just going to write energy for now. And this will be more explained better for further notes, so don't worry. Energy. So make sure you know the 7 characteristics of life, that you just understand them easily, because I promise I don't make these any trick questions. I kind of might try to make those obvious. Those are the easy points. And next, so some processes, specifically with humans, it'll be a little bit easier. We have respiration, we have digestion, circulation, and excretion. When we're thinking about respiration, every time you breathe in through your mouth or through your nose, but you want to be breathing through your nose, we'll learn a little bit later why, you'll see that oxygen will go down this trachea that you're seeing. It will go, and then that oxygen makes its way all the way to these little tips here. And at these little tips, they're connected to blood vessels, and then those blood vessels will deliver that oxygen to these tissues. And then once those tissues, like this muscle, might have used up that oxygen, then it's going to poop out CO2 right back into those blood vessels. And then those blood vessels are going to deliver CO2 right back to the lungs. And so when you breathe out, that CO2 gets released out into the atmosphere. And so you can see oxygen has this direction going into the body, and CO2 wants to exit the body. And so respiration is the process of acquiring gases and releasing a waste gas. And so oxygen is required for metabolism. We'll learn a little bit later why. But otherwise, respiration is the process of obtaining oxygen and removing carbon dioxide. When I say those blood vessels now, even you sort of have to superimpose. And what that means is that you have to place one image on top of the other image, because what you're seeing here is one image. Again, here's our lungs. And again, I'm saying here that at the very tips, there's these little blood vessels connected to it. We refer to those blood vessels as capillaries. And so you can even see that this is even in the shape of a lung here. And so when you breathe in and oxygen traveled into these tips on the lungs, what happens is that they're going to be placed into these blood vessels. These are the blood vessels that I'm referring to. And so they'll be placed in here, and now as your heart beats, it will transport all of those gases throughout the entire body. And so in that same light, CO2 will be placed in the blood vessels, placed back into the heart, back into the lungs so that you can breathe it out. So you're skipping digestion for now. Circulation is the process of our ability to move and distribute nutrients and gases. And so as you can see, movement and distribution of oxygen, as we saw, even CO2 as well, but right now we only have oxygen. Waste as well, because again, CO2 is a waste, but not just that, as you're going to see for urinary a little bit later down a little bit. And then also digestion. Let's jump into that one. Your digestive tract is essentially one giant worm, a very unique worm because it has different segments to it. So for example, point A would be where you consume things. Point B will be where you release feces. And so your food is going to go through a gauntlet of breakdown. First, it gets broken down inside of your oral cavity with your teeth. It'll travel down your esophagus, go into your stomach. And we all know what's in our stomach. It's stomach acid, right? We've all thrown up and had that nasty, coarse taste in our mouth, that bitter taste. And so this stomach acid breaks things down. And then finally, but what is the goal of the digestive tract? It's to absorb those yummy nutrients that all your body needs to build itself up. And so that's the role of the digestive tract. It's to mechanically break things down. Mechanically break things down. And also mechanically. What is the difference between mechanical versus chemical? It's simple. When you're chewing things, right, that's mechanical. But once it's in your stomach and you have stomach acid, right, that's chemical. And we're going to learn that mechanical and chemical, it's much more complicated when we deal with our organs. But for now, just think about it simply. Teeth is breaking it down into smaller components. Chemical, because we need stomach acid. And we're also going to need enzymes to break things down. But don't worry about that just yet. And the goal of the digestive tract is to absorb nutrients. This word, I do not like that it said substances from your publisher here. We're going to have to change this. Nutrients. Nutrients. Absorb nutrients. I guess maybe it's because it's like day one material, so that's why they try to keep it light. And so you can see how circulation, again, is superimposed or embedded in all of these. Respiration delivers gases to everything. Digestion delivers molecules from the external world into all the tissues or cells of the body. And so circulation has a major responsibility in delivering all these things throughout the body. So you can see how circulation has a key word for every single system we just discussed, respiration and digestion, and we're going to see waste in a second. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit now because we are in summer, so we have to grab big picture things, and it's a little easier to hold on to them as well, is that what's the difference between feces and urine, right? Because when you go to the bathroom, you release feces and urine at the same time, but they are two completely different waste products, for example. The digestive tract, whatever you ingested and you could not absorb, meaning that whatever was not placed into your blood vessels will eventually, how big is this? Oh, nice, it's large. And then so it'll eventually make its way into the large intestine, and then it'll leave as feces. So what feces is whatever you consume and you did not absorb, either because you consumed more than your body needs, or you consume things that are indigestible. You are just not able to absorb it. That leaves as feces. Now, what is urine then? Because urine does not come from the digestive tract. It's actually the removal system from your circulation system. So let's walk it through a little slow. When you consume things, these little tiny little worm-like structures called the small intestines will absorb things, and they will place things. Once they're going through, they'll place them inside of these blood vessels that you're seeing here. These blood vessels will take it in and then circulate all the nutrients throughout the entire body, and everything you absorb will be delivered. But to that same effect, or at the end of that story, though, if you look at an individual cell, like we're just going to say a muscle cell that's here on the outside. We can't really see it, but let's just say we're feeding a muscle cell here. You feed it all the yummy nutrients, they arrived, but then that muscle cell, once it uses up that food, those nutrients that you consumed, it has to poop. It has to produce a waste. And so where does it dump that waste? It doesn't have the luxury of just shooting it through your skin. It doesn't just let it out. Where does it place it? Right back in those blood vessels. So it's kind of gross, right? It's like a plate where like once they consume, they use it up, and then what do? They throw that waste right back on their plate. It's a little nasty when you think about it, but what your body adjusts for this is that once it produces the waste into the blood vessels, it'll be delivered to the kidneys. And that brings me to our last little fact, or our last little topic, excretion. The role of the kidneys is to function as a filter. In the same way that you adapt a filter underneath your sink so that when you let water release and it traps all the stuff that you don't want to consume, that's what the kidneys are doing. The blood vessels will go in, and then it'll screen for all the waste, and what the kidneys will do is that it will passage all the waste that's in that circulatory system and place it into the bladder, and then finally, you will remove it as urine. And so excretion, an example of excretion, is what your kidneys do for the body. And we'll talk about this system a little bit more in detail in a little bit. But otherwise, excretion overall as a function is to remove, again, as feces, undigested food. Again, probably from digestive tract, more than it is from digestive tract, now probably. Digestive, can you read that? Digestive. And then waste from metabolism, or waste that the cells utilize, that's going to be wastes removed by kidneys, filters waste from bloodstream. And so you're seeing two different systems, two forms of excretion here. Digestive is feces, right? Unprocessed or undigested food. And then metabolism, keep it light, it's the waste that your cells produce. More on metabolism a little bit further down the line. Make sure that we know these four processes of life. And now you're going to see that a lot of times there's a lot of these little breaks. And sometimes, I think this might be in the wrong place. Let me just double check. No, it's not. And so make sure that you can answer these questions. If someone asks you these, like you went to an interview and they asked you these questions, you should be able to use the previous information to answer those questions. You should not also make an effort to not try to look at your notes and fill out the answer and then try to study. Try to study, then try to answer from your memory. And another key thing too that a lot of students don't want to do, but it is honestly the best thing you could do for yourself, is to just play the audio when you're at home, ask this question to yourself, record your answer from your memory. If you wrote it down, try to answer from memory and listen to yourself. There's just something about evaluating yourself that's really hard, but that's why you remember it. Because a lot of individuals don't like listening to their own voice on a recording. They don't like seeing themselves on a video performing any task. They don't like being interviewed, and you got to get over that. And you got to just be able to be in a mindset that if I'm going to ask you to come up here and teach this class, and you can do it. You really can do it in that manner. I would recommend studying like that. Because when I create questions, they encompass a summary or an answer to these questions. All right, so work through them together or by yourselves to study. And so, now to discuss anatomy a little further, because there are different forms of anatomy, what time is this class supposed to end? What time? 3:05? 3 o'clock. Okay, thank you. And so, anatomy comes from a Latin meaning a Latin term meaning to cut open. And one of the earliest anatomy drawings that we have are from Leonardo da Vinci. It's actually a really interesting and morbid story. His father got ran over by a carriage and died, and he was apparently very attached to his father. And at that time, things were a little bit, what you can do around dead bodies was a little bit more not so regulated. And he went to the morgue and dissected his father in his mourning or in his grief. And then he just started drawing every component as he was cutting through. And the first drawings we have of an anatomy actually come from Leonardo da Vinci. And so whenever he was asked where he learned anatomy, or the body, he always said, "My father taught me." And it's kind of just a really cool story that our first drawings just come from him. And so what is the difference from the different forms of anatomy? Anatomy overall is studying structure. That's what the word just simply applies, by breaking the structure apart. And gross anatomy is what we might mainly focus on, actually 50-50. We focus on gross anatomy and we focus on microscopic anatomy in this course. Gross anatomy, if you look at these two images on the side here, this is a heart here. And what's happened is that they sliced a frontal section for my earlier lab that we went over that today, a frontal section, meaning that you're capable of now seeing the inner chambers of the heart. And so this would be an example of gross anatomy, simply looking at the structures that are here, right? The structures that are there. And if you look closely, what is microscopic anatomy? Microscopic anatomy. This means that you need to use some tool to magnify the view, in other words, a microscope more than likely, in order to view these cells much more up close. And even right now, you're still seeing the same topic when you look at this image and this image, because what you're seeing here is the entire gross anatomy of the heart, the structures that are in the heart, around the heart. And when we say microscopic anatomy, we are referring to what makes up the actual heart itself. For example, this segment here, this is all heart muscle cells, cells that are responsible for the pumping of blood inside of your heart. And so microscopic anatomy is about zooming in into these segments and seeing what it is. But it could also mean zooming in to these valves. I know that we don't know what this is, but these valves, zooming in to these vessels. So microscopic anatomy is about seeing these structures with a microscope. We're going to see when we dissect sheep hearts this semester that you can see all these structures. You can just easily cut and slice it like this with the cleaver. Those cleaver, I'm not I cook, but I don't know the names of things. What are those butcher knives. And so you can make a slice, and you would be able to see it just like this. And I don't need a microscope to see any of this. Gross anatomy. A cleaver, that's what it's called. And then so when you look at now closely, though, you would not be able to see the individual cells without a microscope. And that's the real difference between microscopic anatomy and gross anatomy, is that we're able to see things at a cellular level when we look at things through a microscope. There are different forms of microscopy, dissecting, light, electron. Each one has a different level of strength. Dissecting, you may not see things in as much detail. In other words, you might not be able to zoom in as much as, say, a light microscope. And an electron microscope can zoom in into individual molecules. And right now, I'm reluctant to go into these terms, because some of you may have not taken a science class in a while. Some molecules might feel a little clumsy to use. Cells, some of us might remember what cells are. Tissues, we might not be sure what that is. So this is something we touch on one more time once we learn what cells and tissues and molecules are a little bit more in detail. And then we have physiology. Physiology is going to be the study of function and how those structures relate to those functions. And so even this image, even though, again, beyond the scope of this class, what I see when I look at this is that I am looking at activities around the heart. I'm looking at the heart right now. It's just diagrammed. Its functions are diagrammed. And so you can see physio is about understanding, say, the pressure inside one of those chambers when it beats. With the electrical conduction, the signals required to go through the heart in order for it to beat. And so you can see that this is the study of function as opposed to just studying structures. And so with that, that's really it. And again, these are more practice questions, interview questions. I like to call them interview questions for self-interview. But these relate to the next segment. Some of them are from the past. Some of them, like this one, relate to the next segment. And so just make sure you answer these at the end of your study session so that way you can check or write out paragraphs. Write out your answers in summaries or lists. Try to actually do some writing, because if you can't write it from memory, you don't know it and you're playing with fire. You're relying on recall, and it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous. Make sure that you're able to produce an artifact. Can you write it? Can you speak it? And I would record it if you can. And so today we start a little bit larger instead of starting small. You're going to see that we're going to go very, very small in the next few days, but we keep it very light and fun today. And I love this chapter because it helps you really just see the whole semester at a glance. And so at an organism's level, right, you're looking at the entire organism and you're looking at all the possible structures that exist, and they're all superimposed or imposed on top of each other, meaning that, right, you have this bone here and you can expect that there's going to be these muscles on top of this as well, but they can't show you the muscles and show you the bone at the same time. So you have a lot going on in the body. And as an organism, all these structures work together. But you can break apart each one of these systems into at the organ level. And that's what this next slide is. This is the same picture as we just saw, all those organs superimposed on top of each other. And now this is like the chapters or the superpowers of the body. This is what its functions are. Your body comes with these features, right? These organ levels. And so the task is to stay organized as we go through it. You're going to see our first organ system that we're going to learn about is going to be our integumentary system, which just simply means skin. Skin. And so with that, we start large today, and then we go smaller a little bit further down the line. Now, each one of these, they correspond with your flashcards, but I put it in a little separate picture because I like this one because you can practice, because your goal for today's material, is you have to know the function of each one of these in its generality. I have that for you in this next slide here. These are what I mean by flashcards. It's the same pictures that you saw. And so the definitions that you need to start logging away for each system is located right here for you. And so that becomes our task right now to go through right now. And this table is the same exact thing, but it's a little bit easier. Some students may like to hide it, or just have a little bit of a clue there. But otherwise, it's the same functions that you're seeing on these little flashcards here for each system. And try to keep track that there are 11 organ systems. And just because we're separating them doesn't mean that they have necessarily anything to do with each other. For example, the skin, integumentary system, and the skeletal system don't necessarily have any interplay or any working or function together. And so these two, that's an example of what I mean, or what this statement implies. You have 11 organ systems, and none of these systems work alone. They may not have a relationship, and some of them may have interdependence with each other. So you're just going to see as we go along that you're just going to be able to see that as we go along. Now, starting at integumentary system. Integumentary system, what you have to know is that you have to not only know this definition, you must know an example of these components of that system. So, integumentary system, its function is to provide protection against the outside world. That's why I've referred to it as your skin for now, because that's what your skin is. It's the largest organ in your body, and it's also the site of where your hair can grow. That's why we have body hair. We have hair that's more in some places more than others. The name of skin now in anatomy is epidermis. What does epi mean in Latin? above, upon, on top. And we also have associated glands. What's the type of gland? A simple one. Very nice. But what's even simpler than that? The ones walking over here from the parking lot. Sweat glands. Just keeping it light today. Sweat glands. So it has glands associated with it. And even nails as well are a component of your integumentary system. So no components such as the epidermis, hair, and nails that you would recognize that they are part of the integumentary system. Skeletal system we're all a little familiar with. Skeletal system is broken apart into two components, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. And the skull here that you're seeing, you can see it's in yellow along with this vertebral column. And also your rib cage, which is sometimes called your thoracic cage. You'll notice that it's in yellow because if you're along this axis, this longitudinal axis, it's called axial skeleton. So you can see that only the skull and this vertebra here and this rib cage are part of the axial skeleton. The word appendicular is sort of a play off of the word appendages or limbs. And so everything that's in this hue of brown on my screen, you can see that it's going to be like the scapula, the clavicle, the humerus. I know we don't know these bone names yet, but these bones that are going to form the appendage are going to be the appendicular skeleton. And the skeletal system in and of itself is to provide support and structure. One easy way of thinking about it is that you have lungs and you have a heart located within this rib cage and your thoracic cage that protect it from blunt force. Hence why we even have a definition here for protecting tissue. And so I think providing support would be more like, say, your legs and your vertebra, how posture is so important, right? As we're sitting, like the bones help sort of stay upwards. And so they are providing, again, support. And a little unbeknownst to many is that it stores minerals. It is the greatest store of calcium in your body. You may have all heard a commercial at some point say, milk, it's good for your bones. And that's because it has a lot of calcium. You store your calcium. This is a reserve. When your body needs calcium, it starts decaying your bone so that it can place that calcium in the bloodstream. So not only is it just like a structural component for you, it's made out of a mineral that your body utilizes, such as calcium. And this is something that you will need later in the semester. If you can log it away today, it would be awesome. But if you cannot, it won't be on the first exam. But you still need to know it stores minerals. Might be more beneficial just to understand it altogether for summer. And also, it is also the site of where blood cells originate. Red blood cells, which happen to be part of the cardiovascular system, right? Red blood cells or blood cells, white blood cells, they're all swimming in your bloodstream, which is only or primarily restricted to the blood vessels. And so they actually are where those same blood cells that are flowing through your blood vessels are created, which is pretty unique and cool fact. Now, muscular system. Sometimes you're going to see this referred to as just the skeletal muscular system. Skeletal muscular system. And I'm just going to add it here just sort of as just because you're going to see it, and try not to confuse it just because it says skeletal. But the reason I want to include it there is because look at this skeleton here. Without muscles, it's useless. Muscles, they attach to bones and they cause, like rubber bands, they're capable of decreasing in size. And so they allow the skeleton to move. And just as simply, the word axial and appendicular is used the same way, that it is used in the skeletal system. That axial refers to the muscles that are primarily located in the center line, and then appendicular muscles are everything that connects the limb all the way down. Appendicular muscles deal with muscles on the appendages. Now, the next little note to add here. And you know what, I'll save it for the lab. I'll bring it back with this note because right now it might be a little overkill considering we don't even know what tendons are made of yet. And so with that, let's move on to our next system. Oh, no. The functions of muscular system. And so again, they produce movement because again, they're attached to your skeletal system. And they provide support and they also protection as well. It's not written there, but protection. They sort of serve as a body armor for those precious external organs. They're capable of healing when they're damaged. And they also are a great store of energy molecules, but don't worry about that fact just yet. And generates heat, right? When you're cold or you see some of those people who have their life together and run in like at 6 a.m., you know, somehow, and it's really cold in their little shorts, and they're just running, right? And then they're not cold. That's because as they're running, their muscles are capable of generating heat for the body. And so generates heat. Nervous system. This is essentially who you are, your soul, the primary computer, however way you want to look at it. Your brain and all the memories and experience, all your learning is stored in this organ called the brain. The nervous system is made up of two components. A little bit more than two components, but they can be simply summarized into central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And it's very simple to understand. Central nervous system refers to brain and spinal cord. Here's our brain. Again, this is where all our memories are stored, where all our voluntary actions occur. And the spinal cord is nothing but extensions going away from it. In the same way that you can see that this mouse here, right? Whenever I want to send a command, I know the computer's not connected right now. When the computer's connected and I want to move the mouse, right, this tells me what to do. It sends the signal to the screen. And that's exactly what you're seeing when you look at a brain. It's that the brain sends an electronic command, and then there will be a result of that command. And also as a sensor, right? Like when you think about, that one might be a little bit more difficult to explain now. But otherwise, you just have to think about it, that there are impulses that leave the brain, travel down the spinal cord, and central nervous system only refers to the brain and the spinal cord. This organ, again, has all these extensions that come down, and then that's all your central nervous system is, brain and spinal cord. The word peripheral, in the same way that we use the word peripheral vision, like right now my eyes might be over here, but I'm looking at her right now, right? Peripheral vision, that means that you're looking off to the sides, right? Right now I'm looking at all of you, but I'm looking at my fingers moving. So peripheral means to be on the sides. And so you can keep that in mind. Peripheral nerves, peripheral system is all these nerves that leave the spinal cord. Everything in yellow you're seeing on my screen, all of these are leaving. And it works in a very simple, complicated, and simple manner that when you look at this, these muscles, right? You had a muscle right here. This is a common one. We all know the basic name of this one. What's the name of these that you flex at the beach? Biceps. So these biceps, they don't move on their own. They are commanded by the brain that a signal will travel from the brain, exit, and then connect. And so it will tell the bicep to move. And so it's that simple when you think about it. It's just like wires. So they're connected to particular parts of the brain, goes out, exits, connects, and now you can move that bicep. And so that's the general organization of things, that things travel from the brain and then exit to serve something. And it works in the opposite direction. There are two directions when you think about the brain. There is one traveling away from the brain. That word is called efferent. And then the other word, afferent. And these are R's, sorry. I've been told my R's are terrible. Sorry. Afferent. And this is towards the brain. Or I'm going to put returning. Returning to brain. I think my tip's wearing out a little bit. And so, efferent, when you send a signal away, it's going to be called an efferent signal, an efferent impulse. You'll see these words come up over and over again. That's why I'm introducing it now. And afferent, it's the opposite. Think about touch. And this one's pretty cool, actually, just to even think about. If you think about your table, like right now I'm touching the surface of my table, and this table is very hard, very solid. It's very cold. And where am I feeling that? In my hand? Is there a brain in my hand? No, that cold, I'm feeling it up here. Even though, you're technically touching it here, but the temperature recognition is up here. You don't feel anything here. This is like a little sensor. So it senses the temperature, and you're feeling that cold up here. So it's a little hard to wrap your heads around that because you think you're feeling it down here, but that feeling, even as I push down, I can feel I'm pushing down on it, but really that pressure that I'm feeling when I'm pushing down, I'm feeling it up here. I'm detecting it up here. It's really hard to wrap our heads around that for a little bit, but that's the general premise of when we think about nerve impulses, is that if I want to move this muscle, it travels away to the muscle move. But if it's a sensation like touch, it touches, that signal travels into my brain, or in an afferent direction, And so it commands and directs everything, coordinates the entire body, and not everything is under your control. For example, I want to move my muscles, right? So we call this voluntary. I move and I touch this, and I decided to move it, and I feel it now, and now I can decide to move it. But what about your digestive tract? Go ahead, digest your lunch. Go ahead. I know, break it down. Break it down in your stomach. Go ahead. Beat your heart. Go ahead. Stop your heartbeat. Go ahead. You see, that's what I mean, is that there's a difference between voluntary and involuntary muscles, as you're going to see on Thursday, is that voluntary means I can move it. So the brain controls things, some things, and it controls things that you just cannot control, like your heartbeat, or even right now as I'm talking to you, I don't want to worry about breathing as I'm talking to you, or I don't want to worry about digesting my lunch as I'm talking to you. So it controls things without you even thinking about it. And so that's kind of a unique thing about the brain, and also what we mean by coordinating the activities, and we'll get into a lot more of those details. Now, endocrine is always best discussed after nervous, because this is always easy to understand because it's like cables. We grew up in a time where you just connect this USB, this to this, adapter to this, and you kind of get the general idea, sends an impulse to whatever it's connected to. Endocrine, it functions much more like a communication system, but not by text, not by cable, but by mail. Because like delivery, like UPS or the US Postal Service, because you have glands in your body and that are going to tell other parts of your body what to do. An easy one to always learn and understand is that you have this tiny little gland inside of your brain called the pituitary gland. And this pituitary gland releases hormones and it places it into your bloodstream. And then it'll deliver those very specific hormones, and they target things such as ovaries, and in males, the testes. And so testes, they coordinate the production of sperm, and endocrine coordinates the release of hormones that will lead to ovulation, which will release the egg and make a female more fertile during a given time, so that there's a higher chance, so that there is a chance for a successful reproductive event. And so it coordinates it from the brain. But it didn't do it through cables, it did it through hormones. And it isn't directly attached. And so again, it uses hormones or chemical messengers, which are just little molecules that go and travel long distances through the bloodstream and arrive to their target tissues. And so, as terrible as it sounds, you must learn everything that's in these lines as we're going along. You must learn what each one of these lines are. You must learn everything that's in these boxes, you must learn. Next. And this is one thing that I've never been a fan of doing for anatomy until recently, last year. I hate making students memorize things without knowing what they are. For example, the pineal gland, giving you the function for that, the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, the thymus gland. This is the only time in the semester I will have to ask you to blindly memorize things and without having to know what they are, because it will save you time in the future, and recognizing them is going to be important very, very soon for any given system. And so this is probably going to be the most toughest one, because there's not going to be anything relatable for this and for a while. But you're going to see bones. We're going to go through it starting next week. Muscles, also next week. And so we're going to go through a lot of these things really fast. So that's why summer is a different type of beast. And so with that, the cardiovascular system now is going to be delivering materials throughout the body. It's going to transport all those things that you consume in your digestive tract, such as your nutrients. It delivers hormones. It delivers the waste to the kidneys. And then it also passages all those gases that you absorb in your lungs, and also transports the waste gas of CO2 back out. So it's transporting it throughout the entire body. And that's what the cardiovascular system is, comprising of the heart that beats the blood inside of these blood vessels. You have two types of blood vessels. The red ones are always arteries. The blue, well, I shouldn't say always, I'm just going to say red is typically artery, blue is vein. And the next thing to add here is that the word artery, think about the word away. Let the A remind you of the word away. Let me make my pen a little thinner. Oh, it's thin already. Away. Let the A remind you of away. And vein, what is in Spanish? What does ven mean? To come over here. So when you think about the heart as the star of the show, when the blood is traveling away from the heart, it's going through the red ones or through the arteries. When we say the word vein, it means it's coming back to the heart, coming back to the heart. So that blue leads, when you think about this, you have to imagine these little arrows delivering away if it's in red, delivering towards the heart if it's in blue. And so that's the difference between arteries and veins. And then finally, capillaries are the exchange vessels. Let me zoom out because the pen is too large. Sorry, I'll change the tip today when I get home so that way I can write a little bit more legibly, but otherwise it's so flat. Exchange. And so this is where the site of exchange is the capillaries. When you think about capillaries, you're thinking, okay, drop-off site. For example, we know that the digestive tract, and let's pull up a picture of it. We know that in this digestive tract, this is where all the absorbing of all the nutrients is going to occur. The stomach is going to break it down, and it's going to go into your small intestines, and then your small intestines have capillaries. They have capillaries. You can even see them in this diagram. They sort of place them right around the small intestines, and that's because this is the drop-off site. The nutrients that you consume going through that worm that is your digestive tract will be placed into these capillaries, and then now they circulate throughout your entire body. So that's what capillaries are. Next, lymphatics. This is a little unknown system, or a little like overlooked system, but you have another set of vessels called the lymph vessels, or they're under the organ level or the system, lymphatic system. And what it's involved is regulating volume. Let's see, return tissue fluid. And you can cross this statement out, and I want you to write regulates volume instead. I know, we're almost done. Regulates volume. In other words, liquid volume, if you're not familiar with what I mean by that. Liquid, just in case. Liquid. And so in the water level, or the liquid volume in your body, is regulated by the lymphatic vessels. And not just that, lymphatic. There's a lot of cells in your body called lymphocytes. And they are involved in immunity. And so this little statement here can be summarized as involved in immunity. All the little cells that patrol your body, they are part of your lymphatic system. And now our respiratory system. Our respiratory system, as we saw, was for gas exchange. No need in getting to too much detail here, but gas exchange becomes your keyword here. Oh, dang it. Yeah, I don't know what my thing's getting all stubby, so I'm just going to rely on the pointer. This one. Go gas exchange. Yes. And then it places those gases into your blood vessels while removing CO2. And so respiratory system, however, does not just include the lungs. I know that we're all familiar with the lungs, and it might be the star of the show when it comes to respiratory system, but we consider all these structures that conduct air into the lungs part of the respiratory system as well. And we're going to see that it has a major role in even conditioning air, because I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, but when you breathe in through your nose, you actually condition the air to your body's temperature if you breathe in through your nose. That's why when you're out in the cold, you should be breathing in through your nose, because even that cold air, as it goes in, it's already your body's temperature by the time it's entered your lungs. But you lose those features if you're breathing through your mouth. So don't be a mouth breather. Right? And then, so yes, learn these structure names. You must learn these structure names. And you will be so ahead for Thursday's class when you log all of these terms away, because the hardest chapter in anatomy comes up in 2 days, and that's going to be the tissue stuff. The tissues. And the reason it's hard is because we don't have enough examples in our head. That's why the longer semesters suffer the most. But the shorter semesters do a little bit better because they have all of these amazing examples of all of these organ levels. And so if you go into Thursday's class with this information, you will be ahead of the class. I promise you. And so, yes. You know, there is a limit to how much you can condition air. You can enter hypothermia if it's just too cold. The body's not conditioned to withstand such a cold temperature. So yes, hypothermia is an example of that. Like, you can only condition air to a certain extent before your body just can't do that anymore. Like, it's just, there is such a thing as too cold. So yes, hypothermia is an example of dying from not being able to regulate your body temperature. Digestive system processes food and absorbs those nutrients and places them into capillaries, which will eventually flow through the cardiovascular system. And we'll leave it at that. Urinary system. This is going to remove all the waste that's traveling through your circulatory system. Once those yummy nutrients were delivered by the digestive tract, placed into the blood vessels, delivered to cells, those cells are going to poop it right back into those blood vessels and then deliver it to the kidneys. And all that waste, I know I called it poop, but it's really called waste. All that waste is going to go into the kidneys, and then it's going to form what you know as urine, and it's going to travel through these ureters. It's going to enter the urinary bladder, and you store up to 1 liter of urine, and then finally you expel urine when you're ready to remove it through the urethra. The urethra is going to be the passageway for urine to exit. And again, it's going to remove wastes. It's going to remove excessive water. That's why, if you notice, when you consume excessive water, your water changes in color. A lot of individuals may believe, I'm going to say, this is a half statement because it feels like half true, is that, you know, drinking a lot of water is kind of, there is such a thing as not having enough water in your body, but for the most part, your body keeps your kidneys regulate water level well enough that you don't need to always be drinking water daily. Unless you're taking excessive amounts of salts, excessive amounts of things in your body, like supplements, you might want to be drinking water, but your kidneys, you can trust them to actually regulate the right amount of water. So even if you're drinking a lot of water, then technically you're just going to get rid of it, and it's not really adding any benefits to it. I will say, though, there is more than likely, if you are consuming a lot of alcohol, you're smoking particular substances, you could become particularly more dehydrated, where consuming water might be more necessary. But otherwise, for the most part, your kidneys are really well adapted at maintaining proper water levels. And so it also gets rid of excessive salts that you might consume. We'll discuss what salts actually mean in anatomy tomorrow. And so to finish up, we have our reproductive system. And I am missing a reproductive one here. Where's males? I guess it's missing. So this is what we have. Then we'll learn females, and I'll add the male one tomorrow. We'll just start there. And so the female reproductive system is or reproductive system in general is all about the sex cells. In the body, everything you can just call a cell for now. Everything is just a cell. But when we're talking about sperm and egg, these are the only sex cells in the body. Biological males produce sperm, females produce eggs. It is decided by the DNA in those cells. The DNA inside of those cells determine which sex cells and the organs that support those sex cells that you will be born with. And so that's what the reproductive system is. And I know there's a lot of political climate and debate about genderism and things like that. But in this class, we keep it very simple. We're talking about just what you're born with, the genetic XY and XX. So biological male, biological female, and gender is what you identify as, but it's not discussed in this class. And so we're just talking about the biological, what you can absorb just physically in nature. And so the reproductive system produces sex cells, and it also is responsible for regulating the hormones to support those sex cells. We'll talk about that a little bit of a detail a little bit later. And this one you can get rid of for now because I just feel like this one is a little excessive or a little overkill considering there is enough to learn today. And so when you look at female reproductive system, just keep in mind that mammary glands are included in the female reproductive system because they help support and nurture the young when they're born. Males are missing, but there's a picture of the male here. Oh, here. And the only one we're concerned with is all the structures surrounding the testes, which contain the sperm, and also the pathway that sperm takes to exit during sexual intercourse. And that's kind of what males is talking about. And the same thing for reproductive system for females is really what's the pathway that egg takes once ovulation occurs, and what happens if a sperm cells, once it's inside of that system, if it finds an egg, what happens? And so that's what we learn about when we learn about female reproductive system. And so that is really it for